Hi, I'm Tess from Topstitching Patterns and welcome to my beginner sewing series where we're going to sew 3 patterns together. Each project builds on skills from the last, and by the end you'll have a full outfit made entirely by you. Today is our first project and it's this gorgeous drawstring bag. It's all cut from one fabric and features a drawstring opening. You can wear it open or cinch it closed for a bit more security. My favorite feature is the interchangeable straps. You can easily switch from a chic handbag style to a more relaxed shoulder bag just by tying the straps onto the side loops. The great thing about this bag, there's no metal trims or tricky zips. I've designed it specifically with beginner sewers in mind, and I'm going to walk you through how to cut and sew everything. However, if you are an absolute beginner sewer, I do recommend watching my sewing foundation series first. It's 3 very short videos covering sewing machine basics, fabric and tools for beginners, and how to read and cut a sewing pattern. I think it'll just give you a little bit more confidence before starting these projects with me. For today's tutorial, I'll include both metric and imperial measurements as I go. So first, let's look at what fabric you need. I recommend a light to medium weight fabric with a bit of structure, so nothing too silky or drapey. This one here is made in a cotton sateen, and I think it's the ideal fabric for this bag. Basically anything with a bit of cotton in it, it'll be really easy to press and sew. This one is a slightly lighter weight polyester cotton that was more crisp. Today I'll be making the bag out of this stretch polyester, but if you are a beginner, I would avoid any fabric that has elastane or spandex in it, as it can be trickier to sew. Also, you don't want anything too thick like these fabrics. You won't be able to turn through the ties, it'll be bulky in some spots, and it just won't work well for this bag. You'll need 1 meter or 1 1/8 yards of fabric. You won't use the full width, but we need the length for the ties and straps. You'll also need a small piece of lightweight iron-on interfacing or fusing, approximately 86 centimeters by 25 centimeters or 34 inches by 9.5 inches. We use this in the straps to strengthen them a bit, and I'll show you exactly how to fuse and cut it. Also, there's an optional base insert, so I'm going to show you what it looks like with and without. It also depends on your fabric and whether or not it holds its shape, and also the overall look that you're going for. So I'm going to put some heavier items in the bag now to show you what it looks like. This is it here with the base. You can see it just holds its shape a little bit better. And then this is it without. So this is how it looks with the objects and no base. You can see the shape of the bag has changed slightly. So it is completely up to you what look you want to go for. If you do decide to go for a base insert, this one here is made out of EVA foam, which is a craft foam. So you can see it's quite malleable and it's about 3 millimeters thick. So find a similar material to this. Thick felt or a piece of leather would also work quite nicely. The only thing I would suggest is not going for card or plastic. Personally, I think that those materials will be too stiff and will conflict with the softness of the bag. Finally, there are quite a few ties in this bag, so don't worry if you don't have the turning tools to make these, because I'm going to show you a couple of options, and one easy option if you don't have the tools involves string. You'll need one piece about 150 centimeters or 60 inches long, which covers the length of your long and short ties plus some extra. So we'll reuse the string for each tie as we sew them. It needs to be strong enough that it won't break under pressure, but not too thick so you can sew through it. I'll show you this method when we get to it, so make sure you have that ready. If you do have the turning tools, then perfect, I'll show you how to use those as well. And if you're thinking, there's no way I'm making all of these ties, you can swap them out for a store-bought cord. Just keep in mind it will change the overall look of the bag, but it's definitely a quicker and easier option if you want it. All right, let's jump into cutting the pattern. Start by printing the page with the test square at 100% scale. It should measure 100 millimeters by 100 or 3 15/16 inches. Once that's correct, go ahead and print and tile the rest of the pattern. This is A4 and there's 10 pages. Cut along the border lines, matching the numbers and letters together. Just match the sides that actually have pattern pieces on them. If you need a more in-depth tutorial on cutting and reading your PDF pattern, you can watch my video, How to Read a Sewing Pattern for Beginners. Here's what the A4 PDF pattern looks like once tiled. I've only taped the edges where the patterns are and then cut everything out. These little markings here are notches. They're very important. They help match everything together. So cut small triangles out for those. Now let's cut the bag out. You'll need a bit of space for your fabric and some form of straight line to align the selvage to, so we can get everything nice and straight and flat. I like to use the straight edge of the table, but you can use anything that you have lying around the house, maybe a long ruler or some form of straight line on the floor. Just quickly, as this may help you also, this is not the best quality fabric. You can see how my selvage is quite tight and it's pulling in the fabric. So if you ever come across this, just make tiny clips down the selvage edge to relax the tension so it sits flat. With the right side facing up, carefully fold your fabric over 40 centimeters or 16 inches. Now right sides are on the inside. Make sure there's no creases or pulling. Measure from the selvage to the fold at a few points to check it's a straight fold line. Align the fold with your straight edge, so for me it's straight with the table. The fold to selvage is 40 centimeters or 16 inches. Then we'll cut the inner casing and the long handle B on the single layer here. The handles are block fused, so put them to the side for now and I'll show you how to do those in a moment. Next, follow the lay plan and the cut instructions on each pattern piece, making sure your grain lines are aligned with your straight edge. You might pin your pattern pieces. I like to use weights and then trace them out. This is how it looks once it's all laid out. Make sure you have marked all of your notches and go ahead and cut everything out. Any notches, make tiny clips. Careful not to cut too deep into your stitch line. And that's all the main fabric cut. Now for the fused pattern pieces. For handle style A, there's enough fabric in the offcut. I'll use this little folded piece. Block fuse means to fuse a fabric piece, then cut the pattern out. So I'm cutting a rectangle large enough to fit 2 handle style A pieces with a little extra space so it's not too tight. Make sure you cut a straight edge parallel to the selvage so your grain line is straight, and mark it with some chalk. And the same again for handle style B. Once you have your blocks, place the fusing onto the wrong side, making sure the glue is facing the fabric, and smooth it out. I double check with my pattern piece it's big enough, then cut it out. Take them to the iron and use a pressing cloth so the glue doesn't get on your iron and ironing board. Use a dry heat, no steam, as that can lift the glue. Press down hard, slowly in sections, working bit by bit until the whole piece is adhered together. Align your straight line. I like to cut my fused pieces single layer, so I'll do that now. Bundle your cut pattern, making sure all the same pieces align together, right sides facing in. And finally, if you want the base insert, cut that out too. This is the EVA craft foam, and there's no grain line on that. That's everything cut out. We're now ready to sew. Turn your iron on so it gets nice and hot. The first thing that we're going to sew is the drawstring casing, which is this top part here. Before we sew, I'll quickly show you how these casings work on the bag. This is the inner casing. It's one long piece that runs along the inside with a seam that lines up with the bag's side seam. The outer casing is made from two pieces. This is one here and the other is here. You can see on the pattern we have center and center. These will be holes for the draw cords and they will be on the center of the bag. The inner and outer pieces will align like this, with these notches indicating the side seams. Also, there is a right way up of the casing. The single notches show the top edge of the casing. The double notches show the bottom of the casing, the edge that is sewn to the bag. The outer casing is also slightly wider than the inner casing to allow for a folded edge. And don't worry if this confuses you, it'll all come together as we sew it step by step. First, we want to create the draw cord opening. This is actually a seam with a hole in the middle for the draw cords. Get your two outer casing pieces. Make sure they are both facing the right way up. The double notches on the bottom, single notches on the top. Place them right sides together. On the pattern piece, we can see the notches on either end. They indicate the opening. We want to mark these lines in. Using tailor's chalk, a pencil or heat erasable pen, draw a 1.5 centimeter or 5/8 of an inch seam line on both ends. Pin in place. Next, use the pattern piece as a guide, again checking the notches match so it's the right way up to the cut piece. Mark these in so we know exactly where the opening is. I normally sew on my industrial machine, but today I'll also demonstrate some parts on the home sewing machine so it's nice and clear for you. Sew each end, being careful not to stitch past the opening marks and trim any loose threads. Press the seam allowance open and mark the edge that has the double notches, which is the bottom of the casing, so it's clear for us later. Fold the raw edges under and make sure both are even, so about 8 millimeters wide or 5/16 of an inch. We're going to sew these down so they're finished neatly. Sew a 6 millimeter or 1/4 inch seam. I align the edge of my presser foot with the seam and then adjust the needle position, but use whatever is best for you depending on your sewing machine. Just make sure you don't sew past the folded edge. Sew the 4 folded edges down. Next, get the inner casing, place right sides together and sew a 1 centimeter seam. Trim the seam allowance in half to reduce bulk and press it open. This is what the outer casing now looks like. We have the 2 center openings and the single notches to indicate the side seams. Lay it flat with the double notches, the chalked edge on the bottom and the draw cord openings centered. This is what the inner casing now looks like. There's only 1 side seam and the centers are marked with a double notch for the bottom edge, single notch for the top. We're going to sew these casings together along the top edge. Turn the inner casing wrong way out. Check the double notches are on the bottom. Align the inner casing side seam to the side of the outer casing. Right sides facing together. Pin in place. Then match the draw cord opening to the single notch, which is the center, and pin. Come around and match the single notches, the sides, and pin. And finally, the other draw cord opening. It should now be matched at 4 points. Sew a 1 centimeter seam along the top edge. Next, press the seam allowance up towards the inner casing. We're going to edge stitch the seam, which means to stitch close to the edge. There's actually no fixed rule on the exact distance. It's around 2 to 3 millimeters or 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch from the edge. On my machine, if I align the seam line to this line on my presser foot and the needle to this line, I get a good edge stitch. So find what works for you. Carefully edge stitch all the way around. Fold your casing in half, matching the raw edges. Press it flat. You can see there's a slight turned edge on the fold, and that's where the extra width of the casing has now gone. Pin the 2 centers and 2 sides. Sew the raw edges together, a 1/4 inch or a 6 millimeter seam. This is just to hold them in place, basically a stay stitch. Once that's done, put it to the side. Now it's time for the 2 strap loops. The notches indicate the fold line. With the right side facing out, fold and press each piece in half. Open it up so you see the fold line, and then fold the raw edges in to meet that line and press again. Fold it again and press together. We want to reduce some seam bulk on these two, so open it up and trim the seam allowances in half. Next, edge stitch the folded edges together just like we did before, around 2 to 3 millimeters from the edge. If you find this difficult, it's okay to sew further from the folded edge, so just sew whatever is comfortable for you. And again, put these to the side. Okay, now for the main body of the bag. Take 1 pair and sew a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam around the 3 sides. The other pair will be the lining layer, and we need to leave a gap so we can turn the bag through later. On one side, measure 3 centimeters or 1 inch up from the corner and mark. Leave a gap about 8 centimeters or 3 inches wide and mark. We don't want to sew this part. Sew on either side of the marks and then the rest of the sides. Next, try your best to press open all of the seams. It's a little bit tricky in the corners. And press the seam that has the opening and the lining. Fold and press the edges back 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, so there's a nice crisp edge. For the corners, make sure the seam allowances are lying flat and open. Match the side and base seams together and sew a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam. Once all the corners are done, push them out and give them a little press as much as you can. On the side seams of the 2 bags, trim the seam allowance in half, but don't trim the opening because we need the full 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance there. Now grab those little strap loops we made before and press them in half. On your main bag, so not the lining bag with the hole, align the center of the loops with the side seams. Make sure the stitching on each side is facing the same way, just to be a perfectionist. Stitch them down with a 6 millimeter or 1/4 inch seam. Next, let's attach the drawstring casing to the main bag. The drawstring openings are in the center of the bag, matching the double notches. Place it face down so all the raw edges are together. Pin the opening in place. Move around the edge, matching notches together. The side seam on the inner casing matches the side seam of the bag. This is also the thickest part of the whole bag to sew. Come around to the other side of the bag, match the opening to the double notches, and finally the last remaining side seam to notch. This part will be the most challenging to sew as we need to ensure it fits perfectly together and there's no excess fabric or tucks anywhere. Sew a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter seam around the top edge. To get over the thick side seam, you can manually move the hand wheel to help get the needle through the fabric. And sew with the bag on the bottom layer because the feed dog will help guide the fabric through for a smoother fit. Take your time at this stage, checking that each section lines up with the pinned notches as you sew. Next, get the lining bag and turn it inside out so the wrong side is facing out and the right side is facing the right side of the main bag. Place the main bag inside the lining and match the notches along the top edge. Pin them together. Sew a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam. Keep the lining layer on the bottom against the feed dog, which will again help pull the fabric through. And then this way you can also see the stay stitch line you made earlier and make sure you're sewing past it. Sew slowly, adjusting and gently pulling the fabric to fit each section. If the fabric feels like it's stretched out, you can lift the layers slightly and wiggle them to help them fit together as you're sewing. Now we're going to turn the bag right side out. This is what we call bagging out the bag. Pull everything through the lining hole. Push out the corners and then gently pull the bag off the casing and press the seam nice and flat. Do this on the inside too. The next step is to top stitch the channel of the casing. Hopefully the drawstring opening is in the center. The width of each row is about 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch wide. Let's do the bottom row first. I've put a little mark so I can see how to align my presser foot and needle, and I suggest you do the same. It's important to note, depending on your machine, the thickness of the belt loop might push your presser foot off its sewing line as you sew past it. So you can change it out to a narrower zipper foot to avoid this problem if you need it. So you want to look for some kind of guideline on your machine to align the edge of the casing to. So I'm quite lucky on my machine. It happens to line up perfectly with the edge of the bobbin lid. You can use a magnet seam guide or put some sticky tape down, or even draw a line on the machine if there's no existing line. I'm going to sew the bottom row with my normal presser foot and the magnet seam guide. Once that's done, put a little mark again for the top row. This one's easy. I can use my presser foot as the guide. That's the main body of the bag done. All that's left is we'll put the optional base insert in and then we will close the hole, but we're going to do that at the very last stage. Up next, we're going to do all of the ties and then the handles, and then the bag is pretty much done. There are a lot of ties in this bag. We have the short handle ties, which was style A cut 4, style B cut 4. So there's 8 of these in total. And then we have the long drawstring ties, this long piece, which was pattern piece 6, this long one. And that was cut 2. So we are now going to tackle these. I'm going to show you 2 different methods today. The first method is if you do not have any turning tool and it involves string. And the second method is using a loop turner. Honestly, these are such a game changer. If you are going to be sewing a lot, I would definitely recommend buying one of these. They don't cost much, but they do save you a lot of time. So I will show you this method as well. Let's begin preparing the 8 short handle ties. No matter which turning method you're using, this step comes first. Lay the tie with the wrong side facing you. At one end, take the small right side section and fold it back onto the wrong side, about 8 millimeters or 5/16 of an inch, and press to create a nice neat edge. Do this for all 8 ties. Next, fold each tie in half lengthwise so the right side is on the inside. Okay, method 1, using string. Skip this if you have the loop turner. Cut a piece of string long enough so you have a bit spare either end, around 18 inches or 45 centimeters long. Insert the string into your folded tie so you have a tiny bit poking out the top of your non-folded edge, and wiggle it so it's sitting against the fold. Pin it in place. On the raw end, sew a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam through all layers and the string, and backstitch the whole width a few times to secure it. Then sew a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam down the length of the tie, careful not to catch the string. Make sure when you start the seam that your backstitching is nice and long and extends past the 6mm seam, because we'll cut this off next, and if it's not long enough you'll end up cutting the backstitching off and the seam will unravel. Trim the seam allowance in half, and near the closed string end, trim that nice and close to the stitching so it turns easier. Now let's turn the tie through. Hold the closed end gently with one hand, and with the other pull the string. The goal is to get the end to start turning inside out. So don't try to force too much fabric at once or it'll bunch up and get stuck. Just turn the very tip a little bit to get started. It might sound a bit gross, but if you wet your fingers, like by licking them, it helps grip the fabric and it makes it easier to turn the end through. Pull the entire tie through to the right side, then cut off the seam with the string. Make sure to remove any leftover string and trim it to tidy it up. So don't worry about this end, it will be sewn into the handle so it won't be visible. Method 2, using the loop turner. Sew a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam down the length of the tie, leaving both ends open. Trim the seam allowance in half. On the non-folded end, make a tiny clip in the fold line, ensuring it's within the 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance so it's not too far down the tie. Insert the loop turner, pushing the little latch through the hole and close it to secure the fabric in place, and then pull the tie through. So don't worry about that little cut hole because this end will get sewn into the handle so it won't be visible. So turn all 8 ties through. Once all 8 ties have been turned, the folded end might have come unfolded a little. So to fix this, I like to use something sharp like a pin or a seam ripper to push the fold back in place and tidy it up. Next, press each tie, gently wiggling the seam as you go to pull and flatten it out. And repeat this process for all 8 ties. Now we need to sew the folded end closed. We're going to use a stretch zigzag stitch that will create a nice holding stitch. On your machine, change the stitch to a stretch zigzag stitch so it looks like this. Increase the stitch width to the widest setting and the stitch length to 0. Test it first on a scrap piece of fabric, making sure the width is appropriate to the width of the tie. So you just want to stitch back and forth a few times, just enough to hold it. Once you're happy, place the folded end under the presser foot. We want to create an edge stitch. Align the center of the foot to the center of the tie. Stitch all 8 tie ends closed, trimming any loose threads as you go. Next, let's do the long ties. However, this time we won't be folding back one end because we will double fold and stitch both tie ends once done. Okay, method 1, using string. Skip this if you have a loop turner. Same as before, fold your long tie lengthwise, insert the string and pin in place. So both ends are raw, there's no folded back end. So a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam across one end to hold the string in place, doing long back stitching. And then a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam down the length. Trim the seam allowance and turn it through exactly like we did with the short ties. Cut off the string and tidy up the ends. You should now have 2 raw open ends. Do this for both drawstring ties. Method 2, with the loop turner. Fold your long tie lengthwise. There will be 2 raw open ends. Sew a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam. Trim off the seam allowance. This time, make the clip for the latch in the middle of the tie, not on the fold line, so we can hide it later. Insert the loop turner and turn the tie through. Do this for both drawstring ties. Now our drawstrings are turned through, let's press them the same method as the short ties so they're nice and flat. Trim any threads and fold and press the ends of the ties twice, about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, but it doesn't really matter how wide you fold it as long as all the ends are even. You may want to hand sew a basting stitch to hold them in place or use a pin if you can. If your sewing machine can handle it, you can edge stitch the folded end, or like before, do a holding stitch with the stretch zigzag stitch settings. I hope you survived sewing your ties and it wasn't too frustrating. It's mostly just time consuming. Actually, when I have a repetitive sewing task, I like to put on a cheeky Netflix in the background. It helps pass the time, and then before you know it, you're done. Right, first up, we're going to thread the drawstring into the casing. So one tie is going to go in, around, and out the same hole. So you will need a safety pin or a type of bodkin, which is a drawstring threader like this, to do it. So I'll show you with the safety pin because this is what most people will most likely have. We want to try and reduce the twisting as we thread it. So flip it over and thread it through so you have your nice side facing up. And just pull it around and through until both ties are even in length. And do exactly the same for the other side. Look, it's starting to look so cute. So then when you do pull it, you just grab each tie on both ends and then you just pull it in like this, and it's a nice easy drawstring, like so. And then to open, you just, like that. And that's it. It's starting to come together. This is getting very exciting. We're now ready to do the handles. So style A was the short handle. It goes with 4 of the ties, and then another 4 ties. 1, 2, 3, I've got 5 there. Why have I got 5? Only 4. 4 ties goes with style B, the long handle. Let's start with style A, the short handle. Get one piece, right side facing up. With 2 of your ties, lie these on top of the face side with the raw ends aligned to the short edge of the handle, like so. With a pin and a ruler, mark the 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam on either side. We want the ties to sit a couple of millimeters or 1/16 of an inch off the pin so they don't get caught when sewing. Pin them in place and do the other side exactly the same. You can see there's a tiny gap between the edge of the tie and where our stitch line will be. Let's head to the machine and stay stitched down these ends. So you can remove those outside pins because we don't need them anymore. So you want to make sure that that is less than your, or just your 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, because we don't want the stitch line to show. Sew both ends. Move your ties so they come out in the middle. Get your other piece, right sides facing in, match your center notches and corners. Carefully move the ties out of the way as you pin. We want to leave a 8 centimeter or 3-inch gap on one side so we can turn the handle through. Make sure the ties are flat and coming out of this gap. Sew a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam around the outside edges. You can lift this up and make sure that your tie is out of the way. And when you get to the end, you can use your tape measure to check you're 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch away and ready to pivot for that corner. Now, if you have confidence to do this, we want to reinforce the corners to make them strong. So when you get to the corners, backstitch each corner as you go. Put the needle down, lift the foot and pivot. Come down and around and stop here. Make sure you leave this gap open. Trim back the seam allowance in half, but not where the gap is. At the corners, trim nice and close so they turn easier, but not too close that the fabric will fray. This is why we backstitched these corners so they are strengthened. Use the ties to gently pull it through and bag it out one side at a time. Then get something long and pointy to push the corners out. Just like we did with the ties, wiggle the seam to push it out, press and flatten it. Fold the seam allowance in at the gap evenly so the two sides meet neatly and pin in place. We will edge stitch around the outside of the handle like this. And you can stitch at a wider width if you find edge stitching difficult. Once done, you shouldn't be able to see where the gap is. Trim any loose threads and press as you go. That's the short handle done. Follow the same steps for the long handle. Mark the stitch line, position your ties and stay stitch them in place. Right sides together, match your notches and corners, pinning and moving the ties out of the way. This gap we want slightly bigger, about 10 centimeters or 4 inches wide. And importantly, make sure the ties are laying straight down the middle because we need to be able to reach them through the gap and pull them through. So a 1 centimeter or 3/8 inch, back stitching on the corners. Ran out of thread. Ugh. Classic. Of course, I run out of bobbin thread when we are so close to finishing. Okay, sew around the handle and leave the gap open. And trim your seam allowance. Now you should be able to open up the gap and wiggle this through a little bit to get your ties. This time, because the handle is so long, it's a little more tricky to turn through. Again, we want to hold this end gently. Give it a little wiggle and pull the ties with our other hand to try turn it on itself. If it gets stuck like this, then just pull it back, flatten it, and try again from the start. Great, there it goes. Once you feel it turn, it's a good feeling. Okay, and do the other end. Same as before, push the corners out with something pointy, press it nice and flat, and edge stitch the handle. The handles are done. We are so close to finishing this bag. I will show you how to tie these on very soon. The last two steps. If you are doing the base insert, let's go ahead and put this inside now, and then we will stitch the hole closed in the lining. Insert the base through the lining hole, pushing it into each of the 4 corners. Make sure the center base seam on the bag is laying flat in the middle of the base insert. Put 3 pins in to hold it in place. And don't pin through the lining layer, only through the base and the main layer. We're going to stitch at 3 different points, bang in the middle of the seam. It's called stitching in the ditch. And it's to stop the base insert from moving around. Because we don't want to sew the lining, move the gap so the lining is out of the way. Change your stitch length to its longest and sew a few stitches back and forth to secure it. Move the gap down, so again, this time near the center, back and forth a few times. And once more near the corner, make sure the fabric is laying flat against the base. Oh no! I didn't move this out of the way. Oh, how annoying. I'm gonna have to unpick this and do it again. Okay. Try this again. Okay, that's better. That's the base insert done. Now to close the gap in the lining. It should be pressed already from earlier. Match the edges together and pin, and edge stitch this gap closed. Push the lining layer back in and the corners out. Finally, the finishing touch, decide between the short or the long handle. This is how I tie them on. I'll use the short handle as an example. Lay the ties together on top of one another. Thread them through the loop, so there's about 5 inches or 13 centimeters from handle to loop. And tie a knot so the ends finish up pointing downwards. Do the other side, making sure the lengths of the ties are even. And that's the drawstring bag done. I really hope you're happy with how yours has turned out. Please feel free to send me a photo or tag me on social media, Tess Jean Patterns on Instagram, Tessa Jean Smith on TikTok, because I really want to see how you've made it your own. So we covered a lot of skills in today's video. We covered block fusing, top and edge stitching, and bagging out, all of which we're going to build on in the next project, which is the sun hat. This one will have optional neckties. I think you either love them or you hate them, and it will come in a short and long brim style option too. If you liked today's video, please like and subscribe, and then that way you won't miss the next pattern when it drops. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.